It's great to welcome back to the program today Dr. Michael Shermer, who's the publisher of Skeptic Magazine and a New York Times bestselling author. His latest book is Giving the Devil His Due: Reflections of a Scientific Humanist. It's so great to have you back on.
Nice to be back on, David. Nice to see you.
So these are strange times, and I mean, just to sort of open things up, what have the last couple of months revealed to you, if anything, about humanity that you maybe did not consider as deeply before in terms of our ability to deal with calamity, about our leaders, about really anything? I mean, just where is your mind right now?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, people for the most part have been pretty good about social isolation and staying down in one place. There's a few handful of protesters with their Confederate flags or swastikas and semi-automatic rifles that people point to, but that's pretty rare. I think most people, particularly in California where I'm at, are pretty good. Um, on the negative side, I'd say it's a sign of how fragile and networked the economy is, how quickly things can kind of unravel. And there's no mystery about it. We know exactly why the economy has collapsed. But it does show you to what extent it's all sort of propped up by all of us doing our thing. Just kind of a collective action by individual action, and how what happens when everybody stops, even when they don't want to, how fast that can unravel. Although, as Adam Smith famously said, there's a lot of ruin in a nation, so I don't think we're on the brink of the apocalypse or anything like that. But obviously, we have to get back to work at some point here in the first, probably by June or July, certainly by the end of the summer, before things really get pretty serious in that regard. Just based on the numbers, I'd say I'm a little bit worried this morning that the death rate has not plummeted like I thought it would when the testing went up. I thought with mass testing, the denominator would go way up, and therefore the percentage of death would go down to more like 1%. But it's still at like 5.8% this morning in the United States and about 7% worldwide. So it's possible more testing will change that and get it back down to something like a serious flu. But right at the moment, it's not just a bad flu. It's way worse than that. So I think the social isolation thing was the right move.
Yeah, and of course, when we look at the antibody tests, we have to assume, at least from what we see so far, that the real case denominator is certainly at least a couple of times higher than the real number of cases. But a lot of this stuff
Probably,
we
yeah.
really won't know until later.
Yeah.
In terms of the protesters, a little bit, I've not been giving it too much oxygen in terms of the individuals. I've been more just thinking about the public health implications and the
Yeah.
guidelines that are being put out there. You and I have talked about these issues of free speech and suppression of speech before. You've been critical of right and left for suppressing speech. Is the entire thing of these protests really even an issue of free speech at all in your mind? Because you very quickly see protesters who say, being told I can't be out gathering and protesting violates my constitutional right to assemble and to ask for my grievances to be redressed. It's the government literally saying don't speak. Like, what is there something there, or is that not really a concern here?
I don't think it's really a concern constitutionally or in the long run. Of course, the Constitution guarantees your right to assemble and so on. But if we want to think of it just as a liberty issue, the freedom for you to swing your arm ends at my nose. The harm principle it applies here. That in this particular case, assembling in a large group without social isolation or 6 feet distance and masks and so on does put other people at risk. So while you want your freedom, I should be free from your contamination, and so my freedoms are violated. And so we can talk just freedom versus freedom rather than just freedom versus security. And when you frame it that way, I do think this is going to pass. Most pandemics do wind down after a while. I think the most vulnerable will have already, suffered through within, say, the next month or two, I think. And whether we get a vaccine or not, I think we will get some kind of herd immunity in the next year or so. But the problem is there's so much we don't know. I mean, even Fauci, he's not omniscient.
No.
As much as I admire him, nobody knows a lot of these questions. We just don't know. And that's of course where there's a vacuum of causal explanation. That's where all the goofy ideas come in, and conspiracy theories and alternative medicine, quackery cures and things like that. And they're all over the place. I've been writing about these and tweeting about them, and it's just pretty much every couple hours is a new conspiracy theory. And even Trump yesterday was talking about, not that the Chinese invented the virus in a lab. It very likely is a bat virus derivative from that wet market. But they did do what totalitarian states typically do, which is be, dissemble and be less than honest and delay by weeks before they admit what's going on, much like Chernobyl in the Soviet Union. So this is China's Chernobyl, and I think they're going to pay the price for that, probably with sanctions from other nations. Again, there's so much we don't know.
Well, this seems like ground zero for so much of the work you've been doing for a long time now, in terms of the importance of inquiry, having a basic science education, knowing how to think critically, epistemological basics, where we see, I mean, even with the lab thing as an example, if if a mistake was made at a lab in China and this was allowed to sort of get out, that does not in any way bear on Donald Trump's competence or incompetence in reacting, right? I mean, like in my
That's
mind,
right.
South
Right.
Korea and the United States had their first cases within hours of each other. They dealt with this completely differently. Whether it escaped a lab accidentally or not seems wholly irrelevant to analyzing our government's response.
That's right. Totally irrelevant. Yes, and Trump's easy to criticize because he stumbles so many times. But really, it's not fair, because whatever he would have done, it was going to be the wrong thing to do in somebody's eyes, half the country's eyes. So you shut down too early, and then say in early February, then he would have been accused of being an autocrat using the pandemic as excuse to grab more power, which some politicians have been doing, like in Turkey and Hungary and Israel, and of course already in China, and North Korea was already there. So Trump would have been lumped in with those. And then if he waits too long, then he's a genocidal maniac by letting people die. And so I don't envy that job. No
But
matter
what
what you
about the
do
less
under the
controversial things? Like, for example, South Korea immediately, for example, developed a working test while Trump said, we don't want that test. I don't know that we need one yet. We'll make our own. That failed.
yeah,
South
yeah, yeah,
Korea hired
yeah.
contact tracers right away. Massachusetts
Yeah.
now is looking to hire a contact tracer. There seems to be less controversial things that weren't done.
Yeah, that's right. I would agree with that. And in hindsight, we can look back at the different countries' responses and use those as natural experiments, sort of the comparative method that social scientists use to see, well, this country did that, and these were the results, and so on. Now, they're not perfect, like Sweden, for example. It's a very different culture and more homogeneous, much smaller, and so on. So they're keeping the economy open, is maybe not comparable to us doing the same in America. So you have to be careful on that. I'd say South Korea is a pretty good model. They are a democracy. They have pretty good civil rights, pretty good record of civil rights, and they seem to be striking the right balance so far. But again, we'll see.
When it comes to some of the stuff you talked about, so we've seen everything from here's a silver liquid you can drink to protect yourself. We've seen claims of this is less deadly than the flu. We've seen videos go viral of one or two doctors here or there who will say, hey, nobody else is telling you the truth about this. I'll tell you the truth. We don't need lockdowns. We don't need any of this stuff. Bill Gates conspiracies regarding vaccine. Like, we've seen the full gamut of it.
Yeah.
You've studied this for so long. Is this something that could be cut off with better education in middle school? Is this a media based problem? What are the sources of having this degree of disinformation spread?
Well, the source is, of course, the internet and instant publishing, and everyone's their own publisher. So conspiracy theories can spread more rapidly, particularly in that vacuum of causal explanation when we don't know. So this is kind of a perfect storm for conspiracy theories. I also like the 5G one, the
Yes.
sort of accidental correlation of the rollout of 5G with the coronavirus pandemic. And again, people just glom onto whatever is available, and the 5G, it's invisible and spooky and powerful. Bill Gates, he's powerful, and so I'm old enough to remember when Bill Gates was trying to take over the world in the 90s. So these conspiracy theories about him have been around for a long time. Well, I think new research since 2016, since the 2016 election, and the stuff about the Russian hacking and the manipulation of social media, by bots and so on, it looks like it had very little effect on the election itself or on people's opinions. That is, people were already fairly divided, and that those kind of social bubbles just reinforce what you already believe. But fixing the incorrect facts that are posted there is not likely to change somebody's mind, because that's not why they're there in the first place. So, as the line is that, if you believe that Hillary is running a pedophile ring out of a pizzeria, my correcting your error and believing that isn't going to change your opinion of Hillary,
Right.
because you already don't like Hillary. So I think these kinds of conspiracy theories are largely ineffective in terms of the masses of people and what they're likely to do. I think most people will do what Dr. Fauci says we should do, even though there'll be a handful of the people that try the what was it, that fish tank liquid
Yes.
that had hydroxychloroquine in it as a antifungal drug for fish, and that guy died. That's so rare, and in a population of 340 million people, just 0.0001% doing something crazy is enough to fill the evening news, but not an existential concern.
So, how has the pandemic, if at all, shifted what you think the priorities for humans should be over the next 5 or 10 years? In the sense that you've written about where is the future of humanity in terms of space, and you've talked about Mars. You've talked about your shift on your perspective on guns. Of course, you talk about free speech and the limits of government. I mean, has any of what's happened shifted your view notably on what the priorities should be going forward?
Yeah, well, I do think a lot of cultural norms are going to shift. The handshake is probably gone for years, and it probably won't come back, because once those cultural norms are pretty fluid, and they're not all that binding. Perhaps even hugs will be gone, but we can make it up, with the yoga bow, or the Japanese bow or something like that, and people will get used to that. I do think we'll probably, for a long time, be more sensitive to hand washing and the cleanliness of our environment, both at home and in public places like restaurants, stadiums, things like that. And that's probably a good thing. I could project the number of communicable diseases going down just from those kinds of protective prophylactic measures that we probably should be doing anyway. I think we've all gotten kind of lax about that. I was at that Vancouver TED conference when Bill Gates gave that speech about the next big pandemic, and this is what he's worried about. And all of us were sitting there going, yeah, 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 we've heard this before. Not that we thought he was wrong, but just that, like, yeah, I mean, people say this all the time, and even if it happens, it won't be that bad, and here it is. So I think probably we should have been, in hindsight, doing more, and now we will, and I think that helps. I think probably psychologically more of us will be appreciative of friendships, social relationships and contacts, our immediate social group and who we hang out with, just because so many people are kind of feeling bad, missing that social contact that Zoom and online social media just doesn't give you. And I know, I'm in California. Gavin Newsom closed some of the beaches, but not all of the beaches. Where I'm at in Santa Barbara, the rate's very low here, so the beaches are still open. It's a huge relief for people just to get out and walk around and see other people, even if they're 6 feet away. That human contact, just within physical contact, not touching, but just visually seeing people, I think does matter. I think that's probably going to be the longest term effects. So we'll be healthier. There was a study done just before the coronavirus hit, on that the average human body temperature of 98, what is it, 98.6 degrees
Right.
has actually been going down over the last century or so, probably because the number of inflammatory diseases that causes body temperature to go up have been going down, just because we're getting better medically at treating these things. So I could actually see body temperatures going down, less inflammatory diseases, which is good for long-term health, and maybe people, particularly Americans, and the obesity problem. This might scare people into getting a handle on their diets and exercise, and more people are exercising now. That's a good thing. So even if the whole coronavirus thing was exaggerated, we never had to social isolate and work out and eat so well, exercise and eating well is a good thing to do anyway. So that's not such a bad thing.
No question about that. We've been speaking with Dr. Michael Shermer, publisher of Skeptic Magazine, New York Times bestselling author. The latest book, which we're linking to, is Giving the Devil His Due, Reflections of a Scientific Humanist. Michael, always so great to have you on.
Nice to see you, David. You stay safe there.